Season 1 of The Fairer Sense is sponsored by FreshBooks, the cloud accounting software for small business owners and freelancers who need a better bookkeeping system. Stay tuned for more info on how you can get a free trial. Thanks, FreshBooks.
I'm Kara.
I'm Tanja.
And this is The Fairer Sense.
Rad women
and real money stories
instead of the same old financial bullshit.
On this week's show, when there's someone else in your money.
Hey, what's up? Here we are, episode 2.
Doing it. Oh, I hated that. It just came out.
Fortunately, it's not live.
Ooh, thank God. My street cred would never recover. Oh, man. How are you, Tanja?
I am good. How are you doing?
I'm great. Feeling really, really good. Do you have anything you're loving about life right now?
I have been feeling a major new appreciation for female friends, which I know is not a revelation to approximately 99% of women out there. But I definitely was a person who growing up always identified as having more guy friends and just always thought of myself that way and didn't have as many close women friends. But right now I have a ton of different changes happening in life. I'm leaving my career. I'm prepping to retire early. I'm working on a few different creative projects. And I feel just so completely supported by different groups of women who I feel so lucky to have as friends, including you. And I'm just like really appreciating female friendships, which I know like I'm late to this realization, but I'm happy to have it now. Better late than never, right? How about you?
Yeah, welcome to the party. Welcome to the lady party.
Thank you.
I feel similarly. I deal with anxiety and I've been dealing with a lot of anxiety recently. And I've been very vocal about it with my friends, especially those on the ground here that I can talk to in person. And it has been so nice because so many of them are like, oh my God, same, which helps my anxiety and also reminds me that I do have a support network and it's so nice to be able to chat with people and stops me from feeling completely isolated. So shout out to support networks and friends and ladies, as always.
Shout out to the ladies, as always. We need more shout outs, though. I think we should keep doing that because, like, women don't get enough. We don't get enough shout outs.
God, so true. Oh, so true.
So today we are actually not talking totally about ladies. We're talking about when there's someone else in your money, which in our cases, we are both in hetero relationships with human males. And we're going to talk about what it's like to manage money as part of a couple. And we each do it in different ways.
Yeah, I'm super excited for this episode. I think it's going to be great.
I think we certainly represent two different ways that people can be in relationships. I'm married. You guys are dating and live together. Our finances are totally combined. You guys are still mostly separate, but obviously there are a million other ways that people could think about money together. So our goal is, as always, not to speak to anybody's experience or represent everybody, but just to share our own stories and for what that's worth for folks to be able to take something away from it.
Absolutely. I find there's a lot of power in sharing personal stories, but I don't want anyone to be listening to this thinking they need to compare themselves or they need to do things the way that we do them. And I think that the fact that my relationship and your relationship and how we handle finances are so different speaks to the fact that different strokes for different folks.
Oh, totally. Like that's a huge thing that I really believe is like there isn't a right or wrong way to do this. I think as long as you have a healthy relationship around money, just as you want a healthy relationship around anything, if you're in a relationship with somebody, you want to be able to communicate about all issues. But that's really what matters. Not that you follow any particular model. Like I'm sure everyone has heard the stat that most divorces are caused by money. I actually am not sure that I believe that. I think that could be a manifestation of deeper problems. Like I think if you have a fundamental trust issue in a relationship or you have an inability to communicate or be honest with each other, that plays out with money in very big ways. But that doesn't mean money is the problem. It's the underlying stuff that just shows up in how you manage money together.
Totally. I agree. I sort of agree. I think there's probably a lot of weird money stuff happening in a lot of relationships, but yeah, is it tied to an underlying issue or a larger issue? Yeah, I think it's really interesting to the different types of relationships that we are in and that exist in the world. You're married. I'm not. You are retiring early. I hope to do that, but I'm not there yet. So your relationship with your husband and your relationship to money are very different from the point in time where I'm at. And mine is going to be very different from someone else's out there. So again, we don't want any comparison, but also it's just super cool to recognize different people doing things and to speak to different points in time. So I'm excited to be sharing this now. And who knows, maybe this time next year, this time in 10 years, I'll be sharing a different way of how my partner and I do money.
I love that you brought up point in time because I think that is a super important thing to recognize. We all are so present focused or sometimes future focused, but we often don't, I think, spend enough time looking back and thinking like, wow, look how far I've come or look how far we've come as a couple if you're in a relationship, or more than a couple if you're into polyamory or something. We're into all forms of relationships here. I think it's so easy to look at like, what are our challenges now and think that that defines you forever. But I think being able to look at like some of that growth or seeing evolution is super important, and recognizing that like we all have to start somewhere. You're not going to start out being an expert at anything.
Yeah, exactly. You are not going to start out being an expert at anything. One of my grandmas always likes to remind me that you have to start at the bottom and work your way up. And that's the same in romantic relationships. When it comes to money, you have to start at the foundation and build your way up into the attic of the financial house that you live in with your partner.
And sometimes with different partners. Like I think about the boyfriend that I had before I got married to Mark. He's totally a good guy. Nothing wrong with him as a person. I think we had some different dynamics in the relationship that ultimately made it not one I wanted to stay in forever. But I learned a ton about money management as a couple in that relationship that then I've been able to translate forward into the one with Mark. So I think that's an important thing to recognize too. Like sometimes that growth doesn't always have to happen with the same person. But if it can, great. And certainly you want to be in a relationship where you can grow together. That to me feels like the only important thing, whether it's with a man or a woman or multiple people or, whatever you're into, you want to feel like you're in a place where you can grow together and be in a place to support each other and make good decisions together.
Absolutely. Just a little relationship guideline that I think we can both get behind is you want to be able to grow together. You want to be respected and heard. And that comes into your money as well. If you want to be doing something with your money or money means something to you, you need to convey those things to your partner so that they can get on the same page as you.
All right. Well, should we bring the guys in?
Let's bring the guys in.
So for our first segment today, we're going to hear a bit of a conversation that I had with my husband, Mark. And for some backstory, we've been together for about 12 and a half years, married for a little bit over 9 of that. And he's a couple years older than me, which you'll hear him remind me of a few times because he can never help himself on that. Love you, babe. But there are definitely some big areas where we feel like we've grown together. And I think it'll be cool to share some of that with you guys.
Quick addendum. I am 2 years older than my partner, and I always remind him of that.
Mark will feel so much better knowing that.
Solidarity, Mark.
All right, let's have a listen. We've been together for almost 13 years.
Off and on, like 13 years.
Off and on.
Oh, were we not off and on?
And when we got together, I was 25, you were 28. Am I remembering that right?
I think that's right.
And then we've been married for next year will be 10 years. We just hit 9, right? I know when we were just starting out, we lived together fairly quickly after, we had our long distance year, and then you moved out, and then you sort of had that other place, but you mostly lived with me and you were paying the rent, even though you didn't technically live there, so that I could pay off my debt, which was awesome. At what point did you start to think about our money as being in some way joint, even though we didn't actually combine accounts until we actually got married? How did you think about our money at that point in time?
To some degree, it was pretty much immediately when I moved to LA, right? Because even though we had separate accounts, I was paying for everything we did, essentially, so that you could plow your money towards student loans, paying off the car. Did you have credit card debt at that point?
Mm-hmm.
So while it wasn't any kind of formal combining of finances, we sort of it was still sort of using our finances jointly to meet goals that would benefit both of us ultimately. Did we like formalize that arrangement, or did it just sort of happen? Do you remember how we sort of got to that point?
I think like my recollection was that you were really wanting me to pay off the debt, which obviously I agreed with, but just hadn't been able to, like with only my own money. I shouldn't say I hadn't been able to. I hadn't prioritized it. And then I think, am I remembering right? Like you said you would pay rent and like most of the stuff we did. I know I still bought groceries and I paid some of the like utilities, which were pretty minor. And I still made like my car payment and everything, which was, you didn't have a car, so that was our car. Yeah, I think like that was actually a thing. You were like, I want to help you pay off your debt, and so I'll cover this stuff so you can really like focus.
But I didn't pay your rent, did I? While I still had the other apartment where I worked from, and sometimes and mostly stored boxes there. That first year or whatever, I didn't pay your rent.
Maybe not the first year, but like once you got rid of the fake apartment.
Yeah, that sounds right.
A question that I don't think I've ever asked you before, but I'm kind of curious about is like, at that point in time, for sure, I know you made about double what I earned. And that sort of stayed true for a while. Like I would get raises, but then you would get bigger raises. And I know that was, like you had, and you also at that point, like didn't have a car payment, didn't have any debt because you'd had credit card debt earlier, but had paid that off before we got together. Do you feel like there was anything a little bit like paternalistic in feeling like you were like this benevolent force who could come like handsome prince me out of my bad like financial mistakes?
Well, I don't know about the handsome part, but I mean, I could see I can see that idea. I mean, the reality is like I've always sort of had each according to his or her abilities or, means approach. Like when, in my 20s and, single days, like when I was just hanging out with friends, if we were like going out to a bar and I knew I earned more than some friends, I would buy a round of drinks or something, or maybe 2 rounds of drinks, just so that like I knew people were getting, might be more of a stretch to go have a good time in DC for some, my roommate or friends or things like that. We'd all want to be doing the same things, but I knew I could like pitch in a little more, so I would. To some degree, that's probably a bigger version of that. I don't know. It'd be interesting if the roles were reversed and you had earned a lot more than me at that point. Like how would I have, it's hard to know how I would have felt about that, like taking, allowing you to help me pay down my debt and cover things, if that would have like felt emasculating or something. Did you have any qualms about the way we approach things, or were you like, sweet, free money, or like free, I can pay down my stuff now in a way that I couldn't have before?
It was definitely complicated. Like obviously I welcomed the ability to get rid of the debt. Like there is no, like I'm not going to try to sugarcoat that. I was like thrilled to be able to pay off what turned into almost 30 grand in like 27 months, I think, between the car, the credit cards, and the student loans. Although, to be honest, I don't totally remember like exactly the balance on all those accounts when you came out, but it was definitely a big chunk that I was able to get rid of. So the weight off of that stuff, and I didn't even realize what a weight that stuff was on me until it was gone. It was a little bit like quitting our jobs recently. Like I don't think I realized like how heavy it was keeping that secret that we had this early retirement plan until after it was actually lifted. And I was like, oh, wow, like I feel like Superwoman now. But yeah, I think to your real question, like I do remember feeling conflicted about it. And I do think like, even though I know that you're a feminist and you're like a obviously wonderful human, I do think it felt a little bit like, like you were like doing this favor for me, or like, I also think there's sometimes been a dynamic of like your money was the real money in the relationship and my money was like the auxiliary money that sort of like paid for a few fun things but wasn't like the real funding. And so that definitely, that feeling for sure started then, like, and I've still never caught up to you earnings wise. Like I feel like
I'm 3 years older, so I've, had the compound interest of my raises and things like that. If we were both starting at the same place and et cetera, I should be earning more just by virtue of having done the work longer.
That's true. But if we look at like what we each earned at different ages, like you're still like way outpacing me. And I mean, we work for different companies. Like we can't totally apples to apples that comparison. And you also like, I have benefited from you earning more. So I'm not complaining.
Right, of course.
I don't know if you remember this. Like there was definitely a time when you paid for the condo and I paid for everything else. Like I remember you kind of joking about that where you're like, this is my house. Like those are your groceries or something. And I just remember feeling like kind of shitty about that. Like that, you know, the implication that like, because I earned less, the money meant less, even though like by any standards, I still earned like a very good living.
Mm-hmm. You know, the model that I grew up with, my dad worked the whole time. My mom worked until she was pregnant with me. And then I think she took a little time off when I was young and then went back to work for a little bit part-time, but essentially until she had my sister. But essentially my whole, you know, conscious life, you know, the model I had was dad worked, mom stayed at home. And I mean, that's not to belittle, I hope, at all. She was extremely active in, you know, volunteering and community work. I mean, she did probably 30 hours a week of local volunteering in schools and with, you know, local community organizations, especially helping the homeless, things like that. But, you know, she wasn't bringing in money. So there's definitely a chance that like that, you know, that model still stuck with me, even though if you asked me, I would say, yes, we should both be co-equal partners financially and in all aspects of our relationship. But it's hard to know the extent to which some of the, you know, the model you grew up with is sort of ingrained on an emotional level. And back to the question I asked about, like, if the roles were reversed, how would I have felt about that? And it's hard to know. Probably not good.
I mean, my view is you would definitely not have felt good. And I think I don't even know, to be honest, like how much of that feels like a gender role thing and how much of it is just you. Like, I do think that you define yourself as being a provider. Like, I think if you were gay and you were with another guy, like you would still want to be the one who felt like the provider.
Well, that's why why I point out the age difference is like, yeah, it's hard. It is to some degree hard to disaggregate that too. Because like, again, if we had started at the same places, I should still be earning more. And I would, you know, feel like I would probably feel maybe more like I'm not pulling my weight if you being 3 years behind me in work were earning more, then I would feel like I, you know, wasn't sharing the burden.
It has been a weird thing for me because like, likewise, I grew up with a model of parents where like my dad by far earned the money that supported us. I think my mom's income when she had it, which she worked most of the time, but not 100% of the time. But like her income did have the feel of just like the gravy. And I also think like the dynamic with my parents was not what I would consider a equal partnership. And so, you know, my mom made like the way that I think women are always thought of with money management. Like she made the small household decisions and my dad made all the big real money decisions, which is totally a characterization that I hate, but I also think that is the way it plays out in a ton of households. And I think my view is always like, I don't want to repeat that. I don't want like my money to be thought of the way that my mom's money is thought of. And so it's always been really important to me that my contribution be seen as equal, even if like it's not monetarily equal. But, you know, we've both had jobs that have required far more than 40 hours a week. And for the past many years, I have traveled tons more. And so then the feeling that I'm getting compensated less for that, of course, is more pronounced. But like just thinking about how that plays out in our relationship, there have been times I think where I've felt frustrated that like didn't feel like I got equal credit, even though I'm doing as much work just because like my dollars were smaller. But then at the same time, like I also think, like you said, you would have had a harder time if I had earned more. Like that wouldn't have felt right to you.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that I see people say a lot in personal finance blogs or on Twitter and stuff is like, it's important to find a partner who is frugal or a partner who, you know, has good money habits. And I think about how when we first got together, I was in debt. I still bought like too much crap at Target and would occasionally buy 3 pairs of shoes at Macy's. But otherwise, I was not a huge spender because I just didn't have big means. I was still earning only like 1 or 2 levels above entry level. You had gotten out of debt, so you were responsible in that way. You had saved some money, but you also, like you said, like to buy everybody's round of drinks sometimes. Or like one of the very first dates we ever went on was like a $400 dinner because you really wanted to show me how wonderful life could be. I'm quite sure my jaw hit the floor that it was even possible to spend that much on a dinner. And that meal was amazing. Like, that was something that changed my life. But like, I think about how that advice is like, if you want to have financial success in life, you have to find a frugal partner and find somebody who's like a good saver from the start. And I think about how we actually created more bad habits for each other because you really wanted to impress me with these wonderful dinners. And I actually, a big chunk of the credit card debt that I later had to pay off was because of all the cross-country travel in our cross-country dating year. We actually started by pushing each other to spend more. And so I think it's interesting that here we are retiring early. Like, I just think that we've disproven that rule. I think that, to me, it's less about marrying someone who has good financial habits and more about finding someone who shares your vision of life and has similar values, because that's ultimately what turned us around, was not going like, oh, Dave Ramsey says we have to do X, Y, and Z, but more going like, oh, here's the life that we both agree we really want to live. And that's going to mean like no more $400 dinners and saving that money instead.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. The other thing I hadn't maybe really thought about until we just started talking about it was probably the extent to which we did talk about money things early in the relationship.
Oh, totally. And like, I have a very vivid memory of the first weekend we spent together. That very first weekend, you asked me how much I earned and told me how much you earned. And so, like, I think you're right. I think we did talk about money from day one. And I think you even like asked if I had debt. And we sort of had like a very clear picture of finances, like within, I don't know, the first month of dating.
That seems inappropriate in hindsight.
You don't remember that?
No, I do. I just can't remember why I thought that was appropriate.
But like, maybe you did us a favor. I mean, I remember feeling pretty awkward when you asked me that. And I remember also feeling, until that moment, fairly proud of what I earned. And then after you told me, then I was like, oh, crap, my earning is small.
Well, I was 3 years older. And I suppose I still am.
Which you never fail to remind me. But I think one of the other things that you've made me think about just now in this conversation is it was always very clear, even when we were dropping massive money on some of those meals, because that was not the only $400 dinner, was that we never went into debt to do it. And I think like always living within our means was definitely a huge value that we both always had together.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, I think that neither of us would be here independently, and not just because of dollars, but like, I think that it's pretty amazing that we both went from encouraging each other to spend in early days in some ways to being in a place where then we've been like such positive influences on each other on keeping ourselves inspired and motivated to save for early retirement, which is like a very huge mindset shift on spending. But we both made that shift together, and we've cheered each other on along the way. And like, it feels really great to be able to get to this goal line with you.
Yep.
Good place to end.
Good place to end.
All right, so you got a good flavor there for some of our goofiness together, but also I hope that you heard a lot of the ways in which we grew together, that we might be in a really solid financial place now, about to retire early, but we certainly did not start out there.
Yeah, I loved listening to that because there was a lot of stuff in there that I actually didn't know. And something that really struck me that's very different from how I operate with my partner is how Mark augmented your income to allow you to focus on paying off debt by taking on some of the bigger responsibilities. That's markedly something that my partner and I don't do. And even though there is debt in my relationship, and I love it. And I love how quickly it happened for y'all. Like, just, first of all, I think that speaks very highly to your love and the relationship that you fell into really naturally. And I think it's a huge thing because, as you pointed out earlier, in much the same way as money kind of being a contributing factor to a lot of divorces, especially among younger generations, millennials in particular, people talk about being really uncomfortable with their partner carrying debt, especially large amounts of debt. And I love that Mark was like, yep, let's do this. Absolutely. Whatever we can to get you to the finish line. And I also really like Mark's general generosity. Like, I got this round at the bar. Friends, I just want to have a good time with you. Like, Mark, what a great dude.
Yeah. Did you catch in there how he was saying a round of drinks, but he almost said a round of shots? Like you could kind of hear like the shh come out, shh drinks. His old bachelor days. No, it's totally true that Mark is a completely generous person, and it's one of the things that I love most about him. But like you also heard me say in there, some of the stuff is complicated. Like I was so happy to have the ability to get out of debt, which would have been really hard on my own because my salary was only a little bit higher in a year pre-tax than my debt load. It would have taken forever, especially living in LA as I did at the time, to pay that off on my own. That said, like I'm a feminist. It feels a little weird that I got this help from a guy who did, I think, like he kind of acknowledged this, like want to come in and save me a little bit. In the end, I totally came out ahead, but like it does feel complicated. It's not a completely straightforward thing, but knowing him and knowing that all of that came from a place of love, it's not something that I've ever seriously questioned, and it's certainly not something I have a problem with. It's just, like I would love as a woman to be able to say like, yes, I did all of this myself, but I didn't. And I own that.
Well, and as someone who did pay off all of her debt by herself, let me tell you that if someone had walked up to me and was like, here's a deal for you, I would have been like, yes, thank you. Sign me up. I'll take that immediately.
Yeah.
And also too, like something that I think is really important and that I know that we're trying to do on this podcast is to zoom out a little bit and think, okay, well, if I had been making more money, I would have been able to do this by myself, right? Or it would have been easier to do by myself, and to consider some of the factors as to why you weren't making more money. Yes, it's beginning level job. Yes, expensive cost of living city, but also invisible biases that may have impacted the amount of money you were earning. I obviously can't speak to that in this exact case to be like, yes, you are definitely discriminated against, but like women make less money than men do, and that's something to take into consideration.
Totally. And like, I feel so lucky to have gotten to spend my entire career at a company that I feel really treats people fairly. And I feel very confident that I was not underpaid relative to my peers at that point in my career. But yeah, like I also could have gone into a more science heavy or computer heavy career, and I didn't because of other stuff that happened earlier in life. And so yeah, like I think if I had ended up in computer science or software, I for sure would have been making plenty more and would have been able to get rid of that debt more quickly on my own. I'm totally happy with the arc of my career and how all of that stuff worked out. So I think it's all good. I have zero to complain about. I feel so lucky to have a partner with whom I share values and feel like we're good and supportive on money stuff with each other. But if I had it all to do in a totally perfect world, I would have crushed that debt on my own. Kara, you're a business owner.
Tanya, you're a business owner.
Woo, go us.
And though we are badass business owners who are out here making hilarious podcasts and super engrossing blogs, parts of the job are not as glamorous.
Like creating invoices, tracking payments, or making sure that people actually pay us for our hard work.
Fortunately, FreshBooks makes all of that stuff easy.
FreshBooks is the cloud accounting software that's changing the world for freelancers, small business owners, and everyone in the gig economy, giving us more time to focus on what we really care about.
Like crushing the patriarchy.
I've spent a 15-year career as a W-2 employee and have never actually had to do my own accounting or send an invoice to get paid. It's intimidating, but FreshBooks makes it completely unscary.
I am both happy and ashamed to say that for over a year, I mixed and matched services to do my accounting, and it took so much time. FreshBooks is literally giving me back my time.
FreshBooks is offering a 30-day unrestricted free trial to the Fairer Sense listeners.
To claim it, just go to freshbooks.com/TFC and enter the Fairer Sense in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Okay, so now we're going to hear from a conversation that I had with my partner about how we handle money, and you'll notice that he introduces himself as T-Bone. We're not going to share his name. We are going to protect his anonymity here on the podcast, so get ready to meet T-Bone. And a little background on us, we have been together for a little over 3.5 years. We have very different jobs and work in very different fields, so it really impacts our money, and I'm super excited to share with you how we handle that.
I'm T-Bone. I work in Austin in a small environmental nonprofit. Kara and I have been dating for about 3.5 years.
So something we talk about a lot on the podcast is our own personal experiences with money, starting when we were younger. So can you tell me a little bit about your financial background?
My mom was an elementary music teacher for 35 years in the same school district. My dad has worked for the same company for about 40 years now. We didn't talk about money a whole lot, not super openly. I mean, we were pretty solidly middle class. You know, we owned our home, and it was always very stable. We would take maybe like one vacation a year to the coast or something. Nothing extravagant, and we never worried about money, but it was not something that we had in excess.
Did you work as like a teen?
I worked in the summers and on Christmas break after I turned 16, but I never worked while I was in school until I was a junior in college.
I started working when I was 14, and
It can't be legal.
but I've worked ever since then. That's always been a huge part of my life. Did you ever feel anxious about money growing up?
I never felt anxious about money until law school.
Tell the people a little bit about your relationship to law school.
So I decided to go to law school after it was suggested to me. I didn't put a whole lot of thought into whether that was a career that I really wanted to go for, but I have always done well at school, and I studied for the LSAT, did well on that, so I got a scholarship to go to a pretty good law school, but I did not finish my first year, partly for personal reasons, partly because I was realizing that career was not what I wanted to do, so I do not work as a lawyer.
But you have some debt from law school.
So right now I have about $54,000 in debt from law school from my 1 year, despite having a scholarship for half of the cost of tuition, because I did not understand at the time exactly what I was signing up for whenever I signed my student loan agreements.
Well, I think that's super common, or I know that's super common. As someone who has spent a ton of time thinking about and being involved in the world of student loans, that's a very common story. People say, I didn't really know what I was signing up for, or my parents just told me to do this, or it was the only way I could afford to go, and I thought I'd get a job after college. Nobody was expecting the crash of '08. Nobody was expecting that in a lot of ways college degrees would become optional for jobs. I think it's a very common experience you've had.
And I remember when I was going to orientation, one of the deans talking about student loans and the resources on campus for getting financial aid and understanding them, but I was mostly intimidated by it. I felt like I didn't even have the base knowledge to ask questions about it, and so I just stayed in my blissful state of ignorance, thinking that I would graduate with a law degree, and of course I would make enough money to pay back my loans in a reasonable amount of time.
Let's talk a little bit about us. Let's get into our relationship. Basically, dear listeners, I am a big money nerd, and I got interested in personal finance when I started paying off my own student loan debt. And that's the only major debt I've ever carried in my life. I've been debt-free for over 2 years now. And as we just heard, T-Bone carries kind of a significant amount of debt. So what is it like for you to be dating a money nerd, especially one who is so obsessed with debt and who finds debt to be a source of financial anxiety?
It can be a source of strain because my debt, I think of it as a mistake that I made going to law school without fully realizing everything that entailed, especially with taking on student loan debt. And it's more comfortable to avoid thinking about it and talking about it because it's easier to just live in the moment, make the minimum payments and just not think about it. I do appreciate having a partner who is not only so knowledgeable about the subject, but also passionate about it and who wants people to break through that fear and discomfort about talking about this thing that is a really difficult subject for most people.
Thanks, Boo. Having gone through such a transformative experience in paying off my debt, it made me feel like Wonder Woman. It made me feel like I could do anything, especially because I was working with such limited funds. And for me, it was such an empowering experience, and I forget that that's not always the case for people, that there is a lot of guilt or negative energy or blame caught up in debt. And it's funny because that's where I started. I definitely felt really embarrassed by my debt. I felt really sad about it. I felt trapped by it. but I ended on such a high note, and that's what I tend to remember is the high note. So it's good for me to be taken back to the beginning where there is a lot of anxiety and sadness and just negative emotions around it.
And I've had this debt for 4 years now, and I haven't been watching that number decrease. I've been watching it either stay the same or increase slightly until I've recently started paying a little bit more, and the number has gone down somewhat, but I'm still at the bottom of this hill that looks monumental, thinking, how am I ever going to get to the top of this hill?
Again, I think a very common feeling, something that I myself felt, actually segues nicely into the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is I feel pretty strongly that we shouldn't combine finances in the near future. My hope is that we will do it one day, but in the short term, meaning the next year, year and a half, my biggest personal goal is to shovel as much money into investments as I can. Because I come from this low income background, I have been low income for all of my adulthood. And it's really important for me to build as much of a financial stability for myself as I can. I want to put the floorboards of the house underneath me. And I want it to be like, there's a level of concrete, there's a level of wood, there's just like all of this stability underneath me financially. And if we were to combine money, I think a goal that we both have is for you to be debt free. But I don't want to divert any of my money to paying your debt right now because I still feel so strapped because I don't have that stability. So quite frankly, I'm just not willing to make that sacrifice. I also think a reason that we're not combining financially is because we are kind of in different headspaces about money right now. Part of that stems from my anxiety about the future. Part of that stems from your anxiety about the past. And I just think it would cause more of an issue to combine than to keep it separate.
Yeah, it would be very difficult for me to ask you to take on any of that burden because it does feel like a very personal, this is my cross to bear because of a mistake that I made. And it would only make me feel worse about it and more regretful about it to drag somebody else into this hole with me.
Well, and I think what's also interesting about our finances right now is I own a company and that's entirely in my name. Like you're not a part of that. And I would never expect you to pay for anything that I do with Bravely. I do drag you out to events and make you be my ticket guy, which thank you so much.
I'm an excellent enforcer.
T-Bone the enforcer. But I think more so than some other couples, I think we are financially cautious. And I think we're also very respectful of each other's feelings around money. I'm very open about finances are an anxiety trigger for me, which is why I threw myself so fully into this world, is because I was like, I'm scared of this. So I obviously need to learn everything about it so that I won't be scared anymore. But that doesn't mean that I'm always perfect with it. And it doesn't mean that I've figured out how to gracefully insert someone else into my financial life and my financial truth. And I think that's true for you too. You don't know how to insert me into your world or combine your world with my world yet.
Right. And we are in very different places financially. I believe I still make slightly more money than you do. And
not slightly. Not slightly. It's significant. It's like thousands, if not almost tens of thousands.
Anyway, we're in different money situations, and you have money that you are like a W-2 employee, and then a bunch of freelance work, and then you own an LLC. Meanwhile, I have one job where I'm a W-2 employee. My taxes are taken care of. I just have to deal with it once a year. It's much easier for me to not think about it on a daily basis because my checks are directly deposited into my bank account. I've set up my student loans to be automatically drafted from my bank account. I am making more payments per month, and that's something that I have to do manually, but that's a new development. So I'm still just in a different space than you are with money. It's not my livelihood.
I am fully immersed, and you're like, I see the ocean.
And I'm terrified of that ocean.
What is the most intimidating part of money for you?
I feel like I should know more about it, and the fact that I don't makes me afraid to pursue it more. I think a lot of people avoid things that they are either not proficient in or just uncomfortable with, and that's not necessarily a good habit, but it is easy.
It is easy, that's for sure. That's kind of how I feel about avoiding sugar. I'm like, this would be better for me, but sugar's delicious. So can't fight that fight.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Kara. I loved hearing from you guys. And like you, I feel like I learned a bunch of stuff that I didn't know, but something that your conversation really did for me in particular was bring back so much of my money past. Like, I think that it really came through how much, I think both of you guys to some extent, but definitely T-Bone in particular. I'm still getting used to the nickname, sorry. But how much T-Bone, like, you really hear fear in how he talks about money. And maybe I'm projecting, but it's something that just comes back to me in a very visceral way to think about early in my working career, or even before I was really working for real, just some of that money anxiety and how he talked about being intimidated by money stuff. And so he doesn't really try to learn. Like, I think a ton of us do that. And it could be about money. It could be other things, but something seems hard, or it seems like we're not welcome in that information or in that conversation. And so we don't assert ourselves there. Like, I had a lot of feels listening to it.
Yeah. And obviously T-Bone has a lot of feels. And I think it's so true. It's so easy to feel intimidated by money and alone in that isolation. And it's very easy to get paralyzed by it and to just kind of think, I'm not going to pay attention to it, or I'm going to do just one thing and not focus on these other things. And it's a very complex relationship that you can have with money.
Oh, totally. I love how even though you guys are splitting things different ways and you have a very separate money attitude, I love that it feels like you can really communicate about this stuff, which I think is really hard. You know, we didn't actually combine our finances until after we got married, but we still thought of making money decisions together and thought about how can we do the thing that's best for both of us or best for us as a couple. And it totally feels like you guys do that. And it feels very natural to me.
We didn't get into this in the conversation, but we started talking about money as a couple very early on. Not quite as early as you and Mark, but it was about...
Yeah, the first date's maybe not always when you need to be talking about money.
Or is it? I started sharing really openly about my debt, my anxiety around my debt, and my plan to crush my debt in a short amount of time, like 5 months into the relationship, which I think is pretty early to be being like, hey, I'm making crap for money and I want to tackle this debt. And I remember having a conversation with T-Bone saying, you know, I want to get really serious about this debt, and that's going to affect our social life and how we can go out on dates. And I really want to be serious about saving money. And to his credit, he was like, yes, absolutely. Anything that you have to do, I'm down for. And it shifted. We didn't go out. Our first couple of dates, we went out, you know, concerts, movies, dinner, all of this stuff. And then all of a sudden it was Netflix and catering leftovers for months. Like, I cannot give T-Bone enough credit for just sticking with me through my extreme frugality phase. It was incredible. And I think a large part of it was I was very open about, okay, here's the debt payment I'm able to make this month because I'm able to save so much because we're doing all these things.
No, I mean, I completely love that he was so supportive of that, and that now when he's dealing with his law school debt, that you're so supportive in turn, even though you've been out of debt for 2 years and you could definitely do a few things differently. But it feels like you guys just really have a team attitude, even though your finances on paper are totally separate. Like, it still feels like you're thinking as a unit. Yeah,
I really think we are, which it's so funny. People have a lot of thoughts about how our relationship is going to end because on paper we look really far apart and we are very separate. But, well, we were living a lifestyle and building towards a lifestyle that we both really wanted. And that's what strengthens it. You don't need to find someone who's the exact same money identity as you. You need to find someone who's willing to work towards the lifestyle you both want. And T-Bone and I both want the same lifestyle ultimately, and we're just navigating his debt a little bit differently. So that's how we're handling money in our relationships. And if you are handling money in a different way or in the same way or have feels about how we're handling our money, please shoot us an email. We would love to hear from you. It is fairersense@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Twitter and tweet at us at fairersense, or you can always drop by our site, thefairersense.com, and leave a comment on the show notes. The Fairer Sense is produced by me, Tanja Hester, and this rad human, Kara Perez. Our theme music is by The Insider. Our ad music is by Keith McLeod, with additional music from Breakmaster Cylinder, Spinning Merkaba, and Broke for Free. Photography on our website is by Nick Mendez. And you can always find me at ournextlife.com and Kara over at bravelygo.co.
Thanks for being here. And Tanja, talk to you soon.
Catch you later.
Oh my gosh, so peppy. I love it. DDYL. Text me emoji.